You're ready.
You're ready?
Please go on.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you very much, Zelia. Thank you to all of you for your organization. And I am very, very glad to be here. I wish I were in Brazil with you, but I am with you with my heart. I am in Brazil with my heart. Wow. Well, so um, my talk is about drinking water as a luxury, question mark. And first, I would have liked to start with a song by this French singer who was one of the pioneers of those who warned people about the damage on the earth decades ago. He is Pierre Perret. He is a poet and also a very funny man, but I think it won't work. So you have the link if you want to listen to his song. It's a beautiful song, and I reassure you, I won't sing it. Well, so Rachel Carson says, in an age when man has forgotten his origins and is blind even to his most essential needs for survival, water, along with other resources, has become the victim of his indifference. Well, so I'm going to speak about all those damage on the water of the world. I first speak about a glass of water to warm the world, and this was very important decades ago, more than 40 years ago. After the glass of water, the cup of coffee, the monster, and the murdered river, where I will speak about Brazil and the pollution of a river depicted by an anthropologist, Nancy Shepherd-Hughes. Then human activities killing the ecosystems of lakes and rivers. And finally, how a gesture can reverse the process. Jean Gionos, the man who planted trees. And I was very glad to hear to Haula a moment ago, because there are many echoes between what he said and what I'm going to say, of course. And your question, Zelia, about is there hope or not hope in these African nevons is also something that is very important for me. And in all the parts, I will try to show that all those warnings contain hope. This is also something I would like to show. Well, so and I will speak about what Fred Pierce wrote in this seminal book, When the Rivers Run Dry, and I will quote him for several cases he depicts here. Well, so in 1974, during the presidential campaign in France, René Dumond said, while drinking a glass of water, you can see him here, one day we will no longer be able to make this gesture because the world will be short of water. Most of the populations didn't believe him and even laughed at him. Yet René Dumond, the first ecological candidate to the French presidency of the Republic, an agronomist, an active militant and traveler, specialized in the problems of the agricultural world in southern countries, knew agricultural problems quite well. And when reading Fred Pierce's book, When the Rivers Run Dry, in which the author analyzes water tragedies, we can see that René Dumond was unfortunately right. Pakistan's unhappy valley, Lake Chad's tragedy of the floodplains, India's colossal anarchy, the poisoning of the wells of peace in Palestine, the Aral Sea, all the dams that cause floods, water shortage in Ethiopia and elsewhere. So many people in the world cannot drink a glass of water or irrigate their crops because of pollution, river diversions, dams, deforestation, and other actions that were multiplied in the Anthropocene. When we drink a glass of water in our industrialized countries, do we think about all those who have no drinkable water and must walk miles away to fetch a jar of water? Or those who had drinkable water once and have none now because of our ways of life? Because Coca-Cola Company in India or other companies use it for their financial benefits, or because of wars and conflicts, or because the earth trembled. Anthropologist Nancy Shepherd-Hughes shows that in Brazil, the destruction of the rainforest for the culture of sugarcane was accompanied with the pollution of rivers due to the sugar factories and a high rate of infant mortality. Yet she also shows that the population's struggle, together with the world's awareness, made things change. Such domino effects, either negative ones or positive ones, can be seen in fiction and non-fiction. Jean Gionos' tale, The Man Who Planted Trees, and Wangari Maathai's Unbowed show that the absence of trees leads to the drying of rivers, and on the contrary, when trees are planted again, water comes back. So first, a glass of water, this glass of water, to warm the world. When I thought about water for an article several months ago, two pictures crossed my mind. The living river of my grandmother's village in Spain and the flood devastating the village, which I discovered then at the age of 7, and René Dumond in his red pullover during the 1974 presidential campaign in France, drinking a glass of water and saying, I repeat it, one day we will no longer be able to make this gesture because the world will be short of water. Many times in his books, René Dumond warned people about the damage we cause on the planet and its inhabitants and the necessity to change things very quickly. It was in 1974. I was lucky enough to meet him, and before that he had been hosted by my parents in our house in Toulouse, and he wrote to me in a book, Fight the Good Fight. It's the same words Scott Slovic wrote on a book he gave me years later, Going Away to Think, a book that, like René Dumond's gesture, warns us. In that seminal book, one of the things that struck me and moved me most is the presence of water. The ocean waves in Mexico, the rain and the torrent in the Andrew experimenter's forest when he made the experience of being out of time, the water which Indian people were deprived of because of Coca-Cola Company and his fight through letters to make them aware of that, a dream with a stone in the river and the water flowing around the thinker. Water to warn us, water to understand one's place in the world, to understand oneself. Connections. René Dumond's glass of water is the first image I had, as a warning engraved in my memory. And just after, or just before, that first image, or the second image, I thought about my first visit to my grandmother's village in the Valley of Arun in Spain, in the Pyrenees. The little girl I was saw a sight she would never forget. The village was brown, all mud, after a flood that had destroyed it a few months earlier, 1 year earlier, in fact, in 1963. This was my discovery of the valley of my roots. This was my discovery of the two rivers flowing through the village. Artias means, in the Basque language, the village between two rivers. This was my discovery of how the waters of life can become torrents of mud and destruction, often because humans have transformed nature, cut trees, and thus let water invade plains. So after the glass of water, I will speak about the cup of coffee, the monster and the murdered river, through a sugar factory in Brazil and the pollution of the river leading to hundreds of babies' deaths. So René Dumond's glass of water and, on the other hand, a bottle of Coca-Cola or a cup of coffee. The simplest gestures we have in everyday life, like drinking something that seems quite safe, can be read, in fact, as a warning. Warning about water that is polluted and about people deprived of drinkable water everywhere in the world. Industrial companies are linked with that pollution, and even coffee and the sugar in it, reminding us of that pollution caused by sugar factories, should call us to be more aware. This is what is developed by anthropologist Nancy Scheper-Hughes in her investigation showing the relationship between our industrialized behavior and extreme misery, leading desperate mothers to place their weak babies on the floor, just waiting for their death. The beautiful introduction of her book is entitled Connection, and she reveals the connection between that unbearable situation in Brazil and the small piece of sugar that we put into our coffee. For everything stems from the damage done by cane plantations and cane factories. This connection was revealed to her by another connection, the one between art and reality, as it is a painting that made her aware, when she was a child, of the destructive role of sugar. Sugar plantations increase misery, and sugar factories poison water and the land and bring death. In the prologue, Scheper-Hughes describes the sugar factory dominating the landscape in terms of monstrosity. Because it is a monster she saw in the painting in which she first discovered that place generating misery in the whole area. As a child, she was invited with several neighbors to the dark, damp, cold water flat where Maurice Kish painted. Maurice Kish was born in Vinsk, then in Russia, now Daugavpils, Latvia, in 1895. It was a poor Jewish city and the center of Jewish culture, and he immigrated to New York when he was a teenager. So it is that painting that triggered something in her. But what I remember most of all in those huge surprise canvases were the men of Berry Street and South First Street and South Second, all rushing and converging together on the front gates of the black monster that dominated our landscape, the Domino Sugar refining factory, which we knew only as the sugar house. Those of us who grew up at the foot of the factory, adults and children workers and not, all responded to the movements of the beast. We walked to its shrill whistle, its humming and clangings were a permanent backdrop to our conversations. We breathed its foul fumes, and finally we went to bed to the comforting sound of foghorns guiding ships and their precious cargo to its docks. The crude block of brown sugar coming from the tropics, darkest Africa, we imagined, for what did we, on South 3rd Street of Brooklyn, know, would be purified and whitened, while our flats were dirtied and darkened by the damnable sugar house soot. The anthropologist's childhood memory presents us with a factory that is linked with monstrosity and hell. She opposes the whiteness of the sugar to the darkening of the people's homes. She uses alliterations that emphasize the darkness brought to the place by the factory, foul fumes, dirtied and darkened, damnable. And she plays on an intertext connecting the sugar factory with the presentation of the new industrial town in England as presented by Dickens in Hard Times, where the imaginary city Coketown is darkened by the ashes. He writes, brick that would have been red if the smoke and ashes had allowed it, end of quote. The children's imagined darkest Africa followed a few lines further by a descent into a Brazilian heart of darkness, end of quote, adds a Conradian intertext, equating the industrialization of sugar destroying Brazilian population with the ivory trade destroying Africa. The prologue sets the terrible story that the anthropologist is going to tell, starting with the birth of a child so tiny that she cannot look at the poor baby that is dead like hundreds of other babies, in a world of art and imagination. It is a painting that triggers the child's awareness of the monstrosity of the factory. Then she uses a poetic language while reminding readers of writers denouncing the evils brought by the Industrial Revolution, Dickens, or by colonization, Conrad. She presents us with a world of misery where women go and fetch water polluted by the factory. She said that there is a single source of running water where alto women lined up twice a day between 4 and 6 in the morning and again at night. She adds that those who arrived late or at the end of the long line were forced to fetch water at the banks of the chemically and industrially polluted Capibaribe River, which ran through the town carrying debris from the sugar factories as well as from the local hospital and the tanning factories of Bom Jesus. Together with the pollution of the water, misery obliged women to work either on the plantations or at homes of rich people. And so they had to leave babies, even newborn, at home, unattended or watched over by siblings, sometimes barely more than babies themselves. Their constraints on infant tending, imposed by the economic realities of alto life, contributed to an exceedingly high infant and child mortality, end of quote. Nancy Shepherd-Hughes shows us the terrible situation of the alto before telling us the tragic story of those women she accompanied and helped. Mingling her experience with Brazilian women, her readings of anthropologists and ethnologists' researches, she starts from imagination, the painting, as if she saw there a means of reinventing this world. However tragic the stories, however dark the painting, she says that these lives, these faces, although pained and as fleeting as photos, have also been touched with beauty and grace. Her book is a book of awareness. As a child, she realized the monstrosity of the Domino Sugar Factory while watching a painting. She wants readers to become aware, in turn, of the misery that destroys hundreds of lives and yet is not a fatality. And I was particularly interested in what Haula said, that to know if there is hope or not hope, the attitude of the reader is very important. He must take the baton, in fact, after the writer wrote. Well, so the writer gives us keys to change things, to reverse the movements of the domino sugars. Her books ends on celebration, in fact. The goal of the Moradores of the Alto de Cruzeiro is not resistance, but simply existence. And in the context of these besieged lives, I find human resilience enough to celebrate with them joyfully and hopefully, if always tentatively. By the way, Alto de Cruzeiro is a shanty town in Brazil's municipality. I am not going to teach that to you. Of Timbaúba, I have made a little map. It is here. Well, so Nancy Shepherd-Hughes' book is a book of hope. It is a letter sent to the rest of the world to make people understand the connections existing between life in our rich countries and misery among those who work and live and die for us to be able to put sugar in our coffee. The plantations of which have destroyed native forests and the factories having killed rivers and babies. Nothing is separated, and the horror described by the anthropologist is not a mere report. It is a cry of pain and a cry of hope, suggesting that things can change. And they have changed. In an article she published in 2013, No More Angel Babies on the Alto de Cruzeiro, a dispatch from Brazil's revolution in child survival, she shows how things have radically changed. I saw infants and toddlers who were plump and jolly, and mothers who were relaxed and breastfeeding toddlers as old as 3 years. Powdered milk, the number one baby killer in the past, was almost a banned substance. Then, beyond the human factor, environmental factors figure in the decline in infant mortality in the shanty towns of Timbaúba and other municipalities in northeast Brazil. The most significant of these is the result of a simple, basic municipal public health program, the installation of water pipes that today reach nearly all homes with sufficient clean water. It is amazing to observe the transformative potential of material conditions. Water is life. The anthropologist showed that the population's struggle together with the world's awareness made things change. The book and articles she published showed the whole world the links existing between misery and the destruction and pollution of the environment, especially of water, but also between consumption in rich countries and misery in poor countries. Nancy Shepherd-Hughes showed that in Brazil, the destruction of the rainforest for the culture of sugarcane was accompanied with the pollution of rivers due to the sugar factories and a high rate of infant mortality, as we saw. The story she told suggests that everything is linked and that everybody in Western culture has some part of responsibility. The advertisement that you can see here on the top part of the picture, conceived in 1986 and presenting spectators with an extraordinary show of sugar lumps living various adventures in a domino-like manner, a campaign that led to an increase in the consumption of sugar, could be used in another way. The domino chain, bringing about a series of events linked in the ad with appetizing desserts might be seen otherwise and remind the viewers that the first lump of sugar reveals a structure leading to a cane plantation and factories in South America, themselves leading to the pollution of rivers, themselves leading to hundreds of children's deaths. Nancy Shepherd-Hughes evokes a Brazilian heart of darkness to denounce what happens in the favelas, and we could see a parallel between the sugar dominoes of the advertisement and Joseph Conrad's ivory dominoes at the beginning of Heart of Darkness when the characters play with them. In one case, Europeans play with Africa. In the other case, they play with South America. And in both cases, their greed destroys the land and rivers and thousands of lives. We could also think about another monster, Coca-Cola, whose activities in India, for example, destroys water and deprives thousands of peasants of drinkable water. Scott Slovic mentions it in Going Away to Think. You see here the three versions existing of Going Away to Think, the original American version, the Chinese version published in 2010, and the French version that has just appeared in France. Well, so in this book, there is an essay made of letters sent to the director of Coca-Cola India. And in one of his letters, Scott says to the director, during a recent lecture trip to India, a meeting, by the way, during which he had met Vandana Shiva, I became aware of the impact Coca-Cola and its rival companies, chiefly Pepsi and Parle Bisleri, are having on Indian society through the privatization of water and the pollution of water resources in places like Kerala, Uttar Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and Himachal Pradesh. I was deeply concerned during my trip this fall to learn that thousands of subsistence farmers and other local residents in India have, in recent years, lost their access to the water that their communities have traditionally used for farming, livestock, and daily consumption. Women in Kerala fought against Coca-Cola. And Vandana Shiva published an article in 2005 in the French paper Le Monde Diplomatique, in which she said, evicted by the government in 1977, Coca-Cola settled again in India on 23rd of October 1993, at the very moment when Pepsi-Cola became established there. For more than a year, women from Plachimada tribes in the district of Palagat in Kerala organized sit-ins in order to protest against the drying of the water tables by Coca-Cola. Virendra Kumar, a journalist for the daily paper Mathrubhumi, writes that the inhabitants carry on their heads heavy loads of drinkable water, which they must fetch far away while trucks with sodas go out of the Coca factory. And she reminds us that 9 liters of drinkable water are necessary to make 1 liter of coca. The Adivasi, the native populations in India, women from Plachimada, started their movement little after the opening of Coca-Cola factory, whose production was to reach more than 1 million bottles of Coca-Cola, Fanta, Sprite, Limca, Thumbs Up, Kinley Soda, and Mazza in March 2000. The local panchayat, a political system, had granted permission to it under conditions to draw water with motor-driven pumps, but the multinational illegally started to draw millions of liters of clear water from more than 6 wells, drilled by its care and equipped with extremely powerful electric pumps. The level of the water tables drastically lowered from 45 meters to 150 meters deep. In a dossier made by the French paper Ruée vers l'or bleu, Blue Gold Rush, we are reminded that on the planet, about 1.4 billion people are deprived of drinkable water, while others waste it. Intensive agriculture leads to an uncontrolled consumption and an unprecedented pollution. And we could remember that very far away in time, in the 4th century before our era, before Christ, Greek philosopher Plato wrote about necessary laws on water and underlined the importance to punish those who willingly destroy the water from springs or cisterns already, that is to say, 4 centuries before Christ. He said, water is, among all the products from the garden, the most nutritious one, but it is easy to be corrupted. Neither the earth, indeed, nor the sun, nor the winds, which nourish plants, can be easily destroyed by drugs, diversions, or even thefts. But water is, by nature, exposed to all those disadvantages. So a law is necessary to protect it. Here is the law. Whenever any person will voluntarily destroy spring water or tank water in another person's place, either by putting drugs into it, stopping it with pits, or stealing it, his victim will summon him to the astinomes, magistrates in Athenian democracy. The man who will be proved guilty of causing damage because of drugs will have not only to pay a fine, but also to purify the water springs or the tank according to the rules expressed for that purification. Already in the antiquity, a philosopher warned people about the dangers threatening water and the necessity to pass laws protecting it. It was in the 4th century before Christ, and things are worse and worse. Yet things can change if everybody feels responsible. The mere fact of sending letters to someone in charge of a multinational responsible for damage is something that brings hope. Everybody can send letters. Every individual can act and have a weight on the world situation. Everybody can try to change things. Organizations and individuals denounce the damage created by the factory in India. Scott Slovik's letter was sent in 2006. Coca-Cola factory in Varanasi in India was condemned to be closed in 2014. In 2016, Pepsi and Coca-Cola were accused to use the water of the rivers of the state of Tamil for commercial purposes, while the population suffered from a serious drought. In 2018, the French program Cash Investigation. In this program, the journalist Elise Lucet stopped people in the street in front of the portrait of an Indian woman, Shanti Santikumar, living in Kerala, India. She told them that this woman had fought for years against Coca-Cola Company, which, to produce its soda, deprived the population from access to drinkable water. The journalist explained to passers-by that this woman had decided to fight against Coca-Cola with other women after her. Coca-Cola, who had settled in her village and had pumped all the water from the water table. And she eventually won and managed to make the factory close. it was astonishing to see how people were surprised to see that one woman and the other woman after her from the village, without any means but their voices, had succeeded in fighting a giant like Coca-Cola. Everybody has an influence on the state of the world, both negatively and positively. To take the example of Coca-Cola, when we drink Coca-Cola, and I sometimes drink Coca-Cola, and I also put a sugar lamp in my coffee sometimes, we contribute to the fact that somewhere in India, some peasants have no drinkable water or no water for their crops. But when we decide to write to those who have the power of decision making, we have a chance to reverse the process, to let them know that our behavior can have an incidence on their profits. Perhaps it's a dream, perhaps not, as these Indian women proved. The man having some responsibility in the government, in the Brazilian government, answered my father once. He had asked him while returning to Brazil and seeing that things had made no progress again concerning the agrarian reform, and this man was favorable to the agrarian reform when my father had talked with him years before. He said, now you are in the government. Why has nothing changed? My father said. And this man answered him, we can only do something if there is some exterior pressure, if people write to us. To change things, we must say to those who don't want to change them that there is a great pressure coming from all parts of the world. End of quote. Letters, simple letters, can change the course of things. This is what the organization Survival International does with its French motto, le poids de la plume, the weight of the pen. And with letters, they have managed to make companies like the oil company Mobil or the car company Hyundai go away or not settle in places like Amazonia for Mobil or the forest of the Udage in Siberia for Hyundai. So the pen has really a weight. Well, so now I'm going to shift to my third part, human activities killing the ecosystems of lakes and rivers. Fred Pierce gives a very worrying and realistic picture of all the man-made damage on the waters of the world in his book When the Rivers Dry, with the subtitle, Water, the Defining Crisis of the 21st Century. Among the many disasters caused by the human activities to rivers and lakes, he mentions Lake Chad, tragedy of the floodplains. He tells about the disaster happening when rain is missing and when a wetland is changed into a desert. Well, this is this area here. He writes, so here you can note the evolution of Lake Chad in 1973, where there was water in it, and in 2017, where you can see that there is just a little water in this lake. So he writes, when it happens, lakes shrivel, crops grow brown in the baking sun, fishing nets empty, trees die, and herders slaughter their animals for whatever pitiful amount of cash they can raise. The land curls up and dies. The people depart. And he demonstrates that the situation is much more terrible when the draft is man-made, when the wetland dies because humans have decided to divert the rivers that should replenish it, when the water is taken for little purpose as a statement of the power of one community over another. Here is what he writes. Welcome then to the death of the Hadjija Neguru wetland in northern Nigeria. This dramatic, kite-shaped expanse of green and blue stretching for more than 60 miles along the edge of the Sahara Desert was once a bulwark against the advancing sands. Its lakes were full of fish, and their fertile waters washed annually across the land, creating lush pastures and sustained tens of thousands of cattle and watering more than 500,000 acres of fields that farmers planted with crops as the floodwaters receded. The wetland supported 1 million or more people and provided exports of fish and vegetables to cities across the largest countries of Africa. But dams have been built and water has been diverted upstream for irrigation projects, thus destroying most of the wetland. Devastation has replaced life. Serpil Opperman speaks about, in her beautiful book, Blue Humanities, speaks about Lake Asigor here in Turkey. You have here her book, very, very interesting and a very pregnant book. She gives many examples of the pollution of lakes and oceans, and she takes the examples of Lake Asigor in Turkey. Lake Asigor is one of the many representative cases of the ruination of lentic habitats. A lentic ecosystem is constituted of a biotope and living creatures proper to still waters and waters renewing slowly like ponds and marshes, and the violation of their inhabitants. Another noteworthy example is Lake Powell, a large reservoir located between southeastern Utah and northeastern Arizona in the United States, which is filled to 26% of its capacity due to intense drought. The Great Lakes, Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario, that contain 20% of the world's freshwaters, are also damaged by pollutants, including industrial waste that flow to the lakes as heavy metals, and residential and agricultural waste products that decrease water quality and increase phosphorus levels. She also speaks about the population here, like the greater flamingos, inhabit saline, shallow water environments like salt pans, salt lagoons, and alkaline lakes. The food of greater flamingos is brine shrimp larvae, blue-green and red algae Artemia. Salt pans can also be considered as a feeding area where microorganisms, Artemia salina, live, although their life cycle is affected by the activities on salt pan. Of course, whenever water is polluted, all the life in this water and all the animals living from this water is concerned. Yet things can be changed, and there is some hope here again, as initiatives are taken, as Serpil Opperman underlines. Nevertheless, the initiatives taken by local communities and organizations, such as the AOC program, to change the lake's conditions through pollutant remediation and habitat restoration are important and must continue with effective community engagement and a sustained commitment to mitigation. This is evinced by the restoration of Mono Lake in California, which is known as a bird heaven. If it weren't for the restoration project, the lake's ecosystem would have collapsed under the combined pressure of water diversions and global warming. Here she quotes Berwin in his text, How Decades of Hard-Earned Protection and Restoration Reversed the Collapse of California's Treasured Climate News Inside Climate News Science, in the journal. So it is, she also adds, this project indicates that the protection of Atlantic ecozones must be a high priority for the health of all aquatic organisms against the conceit of human greed. Photographers also warn people, and I would just like to take one example in Sebastião Salgado's hundreds of poignant and so beautiful photos. It's entitled Lake Faguibin Dried Up with the Drought and Invasion of the Desert, Mali 1985. Here you have Lake Faguibin, I don't know the pronunciation, and here Sebastião Salgado's photo. The place, time, fact. But there is the photo. The caption speaks about the dried up lake. The picture shows the desert, which is not really the desert, as there are small stunted trees desperately trying to survive, like the human population. And nearly at the center of our field of vision, in the foreground, we can see the frail figure of a child walking. The child is in connection with the trees. He can even be mistaken for one of the trees at first sight. His fate is the fate of the trees. He is as frail as them, and like them, he wants to live. His noble gait, his walking step show that in spite of the natural disaster, he is still standing, he is still advancing, he is still living. The French title of the book, Sahel, l'homme en détresse, and its Spanish and English titles, Sahel, el fin del camino, and Sahel, the end of the road, seem hopeless. And yet, there is hope in the tragical beauty of those pictures, hope in the dignity of those who try to live on, in spite of the fact that they have nothing to eat, nothing to drink, as water has vanished, as lakes has dried up. There is hope in the beauty of the picture showing a fragile child alone on a lake changed into a desert, in front of poor trees, also trying to survive. A child who walks on with determination, who walks towards the limit of the picture, a fictitious limit masking the reality of the invisible path in the desert, which has no end. Photographers like Salgado, like Louis Elbig or Yann Arthus Bertrand, or scientists like the anthropologist Nancy Shepherd Hughes, want to show all the devastation generated by human activities in the Anthropocene. But they also want to give hope, or else people would stop fighting, and deserts would definitely replace rivers and forests. The little boy in the desert is alone, but he is living, he is standing, he is walking. Sebastião Salgado wants to warn us but also to show the beauty of the world, to lead people to defend the planet and its inhabitants. So many times, I photographed stories that show the degradation of the planet. I had one idea to go and photograph the factories that were polluting and to see all the deposits of garbage, but in the end, I thought the only way to give us an incentive, to bring hope, is to show the pictures of the pristine planet, to see the innocence. And this is also what the American philosopher and nature writer Kathleen Dean Moore said in the lecture she gave last year in the Pyrenees. Our work as writers is to open people's hearts without breaking them. It's our duty to show today's challenges in such a way that people should not be paralyzed. It was in a lecture. So everywhere in the world, human activities destroy lands and lakes and rivers and oceans. In some parts of many countries, the pollution of water by pesticides or oil or plastic threatens biodiversity and also sometimes deprives human inhabitants from drinkable water. And yet, things could change with only small and yet strong gestures. This is what Jean Giono demonstrated in his tale, The Man Who Planted Trees. This is the last part here, how a gesture can reverse the process. And this is what Jean Giono's tale shows so well. This tale demonstrates how a simple gesture can change everything. When the tale starts in a village of Provence in southern France, the climate is hostile, there are no trees, the river is dry, and the inhabitants of the village leave. Only a shepherd stays, and when a traveler visits him, he welcomes him and shows him what he does. And this is also an echo to what Paula said, a quotation she gave in one of the novels about the fact that when water disappears, everything disappears. And when trees disappear, everything disappears. The man has lost his wife and son after the First World War, but instead of shutting himself in despair, he decides to plant an acorn every day. He selects a few acorns every day and plants them. The traveler coming there is surprised. Time elapses. There is another war. There are tragedies, and the shepherd just goes on planting acorns. When the travelers return years later, after the Second World War, he sees a new village. The desert has been replaced by the dense forest, and water has come back. With water, animals and plants have come back, and the inhabitants of the village have returned. Life has returned, because the presence of trees keeps the water. And the shepherd has understood that. From the beginning, he tried to reconstitute the forest, tried to reconstitute life. Wangari Maathai explains the connection between trees and water. In the preface she wrote to the English version to Giono's tale, I first became aware of the importance of trees as a little girl, when my grandmother told me that I should not collect wood from the nearby fig tree because it was a gift from God. Even if I didn't know then why fig trees were special, I later understood that the fig tree's deep roots tapped into the underground streams and brought water to the surface, replenishing the land and bringing its life. Unfortunately, that indigenous wisdom, like the tree, did not survive the forces of colonialism and globalization. The pure stream where I used to play with frogs pond and tadpoles dried up, like the tree, a victim of short-sighted forestry practices and the growing of cash crops. I began to plant trees with the Green Belt Movement, an organization I founded in 1977. Rural women had been telling me that they had to ask further and further to collect firewood for fuel. Their families were malnourished and their land was degraded. I saw that planting trees could provide these women with firewood, fruit, fodder for their livestock, and fencing for their land, and also stop soil erosion and keep streams flowing. Like the narrator of The Man Who Planted Trees, like the narrator of The Man Who Planted Trees, I saw human communities restored along with nature. She did the same as Giono's shepherd, in fact. Water is life. Water helps us to see time passing, or us passing in time, as Scott Momaday says. The waters tell of time. Always rivers run upon the earth and quench its thirst. Bright water carries our burdens across long distance. Without water, we and all that we know would wither and die. We measure time by the flow of water as it passes us by. But in truth, it is we who pass through time. We could conclude with Fred Pierce's words. It requires us to find ways of storing water without wrecking the environment, of restoring water to rivers and refilling lakes and wetlands without leaving people thirsty, and of sharing waters rather than fighting over them. It requires us to go with the flow and to do it before the rivers finally run dry. So to really conclude, let's always fight so that everybody in the world could go on drinking a glass of water, as René Dumond said in 1974. We should remain attentive to each of our gestures and try to fight all powers destroying lands and waters. We must be aware that we may be short of water and that there are people in the world who have no drinkable water. We must be able to fight together. To make people aware, scientific books, poetry, letters are all necessary, and songs too. A song by Magic System, an Ivorian band, L'eau va manquer, we are going to be short of water, is like René Dumond's glass of water, a warning and a cry of hope, a way of urging us to be active. I don't know if I can, no, sorry. So in that song, in the burden of that song, the singers say, let's gather together and let's reinvent ourselves. So as the song says, let's gather together and let's reinvent ourselves. Thank you.
Françoise, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you for that wonderful lecture. I think it was a great example of the activist dimension of eco-criticism. There's a double sound, so I'm hesitating to speak. Can you turn off your microphone? There, I think that's better. Okay. Yeah, and then remember to unmute yourself when you speak. But again, thank you very much for your lecture, and wide-ranging lecture covering the entire planet and focusing on water. So as you know, I'm particularly interested in eco-criticism as a form of engagement. And I thought that your lecture was clearly an example of that engaged spirit in the field. One of the questions that we've been asking during this conference is how we can best communicate with society, with ourselves and with other individuals and organizations in society that don't really want to pay attention to these issues, that are not listening. I mean, in a way, people like you and I, we often find ourselves singing to the choir, preaching to people who agree with us, essentially. So how do you think we can do our best job of reaching beyond our smaller circle of people who are already aware of these extreme problems and finding new audiences, wider audiences of decision makers in society who might help us to change the direction of our cultures so that we can be more appreciative of resources like water. So how can we communicate beyond our smaller circle? I wonder if you have some thoughts about that. Thank you again for your lecture. And you can
thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Scott, for this fundamental question. And yes, of course, we have the impression sometimes to preach to the choir, but I think the letters are first letters, petitions, etc. All the things that happen online. The fact of our voice is. I'm not greatly user of networks, but I know that this is a great tool. I don't want to use the word weapon, but it is a peaceful weapon to try to reach as many people as possible. This is the first thing. Another thing is something that struck me when I watched the program by Elise Lucet, which I mentioned, when she spoke about the fight of women in Kerala. And there was a portrait in the street in Paris, portrait of that woman, and she stopped people in the street, and there was not one man or one woman who had heard about that, and all of them were very much interested in it, and all of them said, but if I didn't imagine that one woman could do that. And an old woman said, but she could do that alone, and she had no means, and I have many more means than her, and I wouldn't have imagined that I could do something. I think that we must reach people where they are. That is to say, perhaps get out of our comfort zone, and perhaps not only to speak, and even in conferences, by the way, try to find some spaces to reach people outside and to trigger dialogues with them. Perhaps with art. Of course, art is one of the most efficient tools to make people aware of things. Songs, of course, and writing, of course. But even that, I think that even if I am convinced of the weight of literature, and I think that all forms of literature, particularly popular, what we call popular literature, that is to say songs and rap, etc., must reach many more people. So this is important I think it's important to go out of our comfort zone and go where people are, in fact, instead of giving an appointment and saying, well, I will talk that day in that place, etc. We should do like that journalist, and I was very much impressed with the way that people were glad, in fact, to learn things she said to them. Perhaps the people who were interviewed were chosen, and perhaps not all the people were happy. But I think it is important to go to people in whatever form, perhaps not simply in the street. She is a journalist, so she had, and there was a camera filming the scene. We have not necessarily the opportunity to do that. But there are many other means, particularly in conferences. I think there may be things. I think you have planted trees, and this is something very concrete. And there are many concrete things I think that can be done. And one of the things in which I believe most is the weight of letters, what you had done for Coca-Cola, what Survival International does. And I think that when there are letters online or real letters, sometimes they are sent via the post by snail mail, so it is longer, but it is perhaps more important because it strikes those who make decisions. They don't like very much receiving letters, but they think about it, and particularly with companies, and it is the same with governments. They want to have people voting for them, and they want to have people buying their products. So this is a thing they can hear. If there are many people, of course, if there is only one person saying it has no weight, but if there are many people sending letters, there is a weight. So this is what I think. I am a hopeful person. Sorry. But I think there are many means of reaching people.
Thank you, Françoise. Who else would like to say something? Oh, here's Zelia.
Hi, first of all, I would like to congratulate you on your expanded analysis on the water problem, because the problems go on. And I'm particularly interested because it's very close to my hometown, to my state. I'm from João Pessoa, Paraíba, and Recife and this area of sugar plantation is very common to us. It's a beautiful area. Apparently, it's a very beautiful area. Everything is so green with sugar cane. And we cannot, so when we think about, I'm very aware about that since my childhood, when we used to travel from João Pessoa to Recife, but we are not aware about this problem of water, of course. And what I want to know from you, Françoise, is how this study is going on today. It would be a challenge for you if you could come to the northeast of Brazil and you could check together how are the things today. Because the oppression goes on. So the oppression of nature is also the oppression of people who are surrounded by nature. And it's an area of a huge problem. So I would like to know if you have reference about this today, and how do you think to expand these wonderful and important studies? Because it's something related to activism and knowledge and making us aware beyond the field of the fictional field.
Yes, thank you, Zelia. Of course, this is a great problem. I had noted that it was close to your area when I had looked at the map, and well, no, I have no recent references. The articles, the article by Shepherd is from 2007 and 17, first 2013 and again 2017, but I have no, but I try to have more information for what happens now. I have not read anything about what happens now. In fact, what Shepherd said, she was hopeful because things had been change in this particular place in depth because the water pipes had been built, etc. So there was this was something that could remain for not forever, but for a long time. The clean water was everybody could have clean water at that moment. But concerning pollution, concerning clean factories, I am afraid that there are still problems, but I have not read anything like that. But I'll do it. This is important, very important. Yes, thank you, Lilia, for this.
Thank you, Françoise. There is another also curiosity on my side. So, it's about the Coca-Cola, because Coca-Cola has been going on recently trying to grab the resources of water here in Brazil too. So I was wondering if you have something about that, or so how do you think about developing and going on with this research? Because to me, it's a very powerful bibliographical material on this relationship of capitalism and environmental degradation.
Yes, you are right, and this is something that that should be researched more in depth. And this I will do it later, of course. For Coca-Cola is still a giant, and of course, if some people locally win the battle, Coca-Cola remains a giant, poisoning some rivers in the world, and this is diverting some rivers elsewhere. So this is something I think they are perhaps a little more careful than in the past, because they know that, that there are people looking at them. So perhaps there are more, there is a little more prudence on Coca-Cola's part, but it's still a great factory, and a big factory generally uses products that can poison rivers. But I have not read anything very recent about that. So I'll do it, and you are quite right. And I planned to research on this problem and the Brazilian problem, which interests me particularly.
It is extremely important, and we are very happy that you're going to conduct your research on this. And we are most welcome here, especially in my home area. So it was very important. I would like to.
Yes, I would be very glad if you and me could investigate in this area. Yes, Sila.
Yes, it's very provocative challenge. I'm in. I'm in.
Yes,
So,
this is a project. Well, yeah, I would be very glad to do that.
So let's talk more about this later. Now I would like to know if somebody else has any question to Professor Françoise. No? Well, I'm sure that your talk is very important, and it will certainly inspire all of us to think better about the environment. So we appreciate once more. We thank you very much, and bye-bye for a while.
Bye-bye, and thank you to you for inviting me.
Say hello to your cat.
I do that. Yes, thank you, Zilia.
Okay.
I tell them.
Take care. Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Ciao.